I think something's wrong with my dad. If you've ever been on r/ray said be narcissists, you know the type of dude my dad is. Semicolon. Ever since I got my first period, he's seen me as a woman. Yeah, I know. Gross. And he really doesn't like women, so that's obviously made things a bit rough on our relationship. Hell, you should've seen him when I said I was gay too. Semicolon. Our relationship is complicated. We occasionally have dinner together, make small talk that's tense, bordering on arguing. He makes passive aggressive, or just straight up aggressive, comments about the liberals and the queers, and I ask him if he's threatened by something, or if he's just being a general dick. He grunts and comments that I was prettier with long hair, and then takes a gigantic bite of his Hawaiian pizza, and we go back to sniping back and forth about why he thinks people don't deserve human rights and what branch of science he's decided to cast cynicism on most recently. You know, the usual. Semicolon. Anyway, a couple days ago, I agreed to meet him for dinner again. I hadn't talked with him in quite a while after a particularly crude comment about my sexuality and a couple other choice things. I realize it's stupid to continue seeing him. By the way, every therapist and friend I've ever had has told me so. Thing is, I think it'd be incredibly depressing for him to die all alone, which he will definitely do if I stop meeting up with him. Trust me, I'm the last charred bridge barely hanging in there. Semicolon. We met at a local pizza joint. I arrived 15 minutes late, since he always arrived 20 minutes late. I've perfected my timing over the years, after all. Semicolon. Only his car was already sitting in the parking lot, and he was standing leaning against it. Semicolon. Shit, I thought. I don't even remember the last time I was later than him, but I knew him well enough to know how badly this was about to go. Semicolon. Hey, I called weakly, raising my arm to shield against the sunlight. Hey, sorry I'm late. I was eating potato chips on the couch. Traffic. Semicolon. No problem, sweetie, he called cheerily. I narrowed my eyes as I approached. He called me sweetheart condescendingly when he was angry. I'd never heard this kind tone sweetie before. Usually, when he wasn't actively mad at me, he'd call me M or Mags. Semicolon. But that was life with narcissists, I supposed, brushing it off. It could be quite unpredictable. Semicolon. We went inside and sat down. My dad smiled politely at the waitress. Didn't check out her, but right in front of her, or call her a lovely little thing. Just asked her how her day was, and ordered a Coke. Didn't even watch her go as she left. Instead, he turned his attention back to me. Semicolon. Great temperature in here, he commented brightly. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I noticed they were a slightly darker brown than usual, almost black. But then, he already had very dark eyes, and the restaurant wasn't super well lit. Semicolon. Then what he'd said actually caught up to me. Great. What? Semicolon. Temperature, he responded, entirely unbothered by my confusion. Nice and cool, yeah? It's so nice to finally be in the cool. Semicolon. Okay, I said doubtfully. Dad, you feeling alright? Semicolon. I winced, waiting for the usual aggression that inevitably followed my slip up as I tried to ensure his well-being. Semicolon. Feeling better than ever, sweetie, he responded, still in that chipper voice, the one I hadn't heard since I was a little kid, back when he was still proud of me, or at least, when he could still stand to hear me talk. Why, don't I look alright? Semicolon. I looked him up and down. Actually, he looked. Semicolon. You look great, I said, trying to make my tone sound happy, but undoubtedly sounding suspicious instead. I wasn't lying, at least. His skin had a healthy glow to it I had never seen. Irreversibly sun-damaged skin suddenly clear and healthy. His hair, normally thin and stringy, looked lush, healthy. Even his bald spot was covered up. The dark bags under his eyes, ever present, were gone. Even his teeth seemed whiter, his nails less yellowed. Seriously, have you seen a doctor recently? Semicolon. Not, I thought to myself, that a doctor could accomplish all of that. Still, grasping at straws is what I tend to do in confusing situations. Semicolon. Oh, no, he responded. He didn't seem offended by the question, just enthusiastic to answer. No, I found some snake oil at the farmer's market that's been working wonders. Semicolon. What kind of snake oil? Semicolon. He laughed, a hearty and rich sound. I almost teared up as I realized I don't think I'd actually heard that sound ever before. I committed it to memory, determined to keep one souvenir from this weird day. Just snake oil, sweetie, he said. How's school been treating you? And then we were off on a completely unrelated topic. One, I might add, in which he'd never shown interest before. On good days, he was uninterested in my area of study. On less good days, he was viscerally ashamed to have an artist in the family. Semicolon. We finished lunch around 2 p.m. Shockingly, we hadn't gotten into a single disagreement, and not through gratuitous lying and biting my tongue on my part either. In fact, I'd had fun. Semicolon. Let's go, I told him, standing. He glanced out the window, brow furrowing momentarily. Semicolon. Actually, sweetie, it looks a bit hot out there, he said. I think I'll stay here for a bit. You're welcome to go, though. Semicolon. I recognized the dismissal, although it wasn't as firm as the ones I was used to. Alright, Dad. I'll text you later. Semicolon. Lost my phone, he said immediately, which gave me pause, since we'd arranged this dinner over text 2 days prior. I know, silly me. I'm so forgetful. I'll drop by soon. Okay, sweetie? Semicolon. Okay, I said skeptically, and I left. Semicolon. At home, I mentioned how odd he was to my mom, and she scoffed, called him a jackass, and reminded me that he'd been nice before, and that it never lasted long. She was right, even if I thought this felt different, somehow. Semicolon. The next day, I opened my door to check the mailbox, and came face to face with my dad, who was standing silent and still outside with a contented smile on his face. Semicolon. I nearly jumped out of my skin, screaming and slamming the door in his face on instinct. Once I'd taken a couple deep breaths and collected myself, I opened the door again, to find his grin undiminished. Semicolon. Dad, I said. He blinked but otherwise stayed still. What's up? Semicolon. Just dropping by like I said, sweetie, he responded. Care to go for a walk? Semicolon. I squinted at him, trying to think of a reason to refuse. First and foremost, he never goes for walks. He especially never goes on walks with me. That's a dangerous activity, considering it gives me plenty of time to talk and nothing for him to make me do, unless he gets extremely creative. But secondly, semicolon. It's raining, I said. Semicolon. Yes, it is, he said serenely. His eyes, dark and shiny, gleamed as he glanced at the sky. Semicolon. So maybe no walk, I said stupidly. There was a pause, in which he seemed not at all inclined to rescue me by responding. In the rain, I mean. Semicolon. Nonsense, he said, which was a word I'd never heard him say in all 22 years of my life. It's a perfect day for a walk. Semicolon. And that was how I ended up walking, shivering, through the rain next to my dad, while I was dressed in a raincoat, boots, and a hat, and still ended up cold. He wore his typical dad shorts and Hawaiian t-shirt that I swear I tried to dispose of 12 years ago and didn't seem uncomfortable in the least. In fact, there was a spring in his step I'd never noticed. I'd noticed he'd always walked with a limp before, due to an accident he'd gotten into back when he worked in a shipyard as a young man. The limp was gone now. Semicolon. Some weather, I thought somewhat manically. Semicolon. We talked while we walked. He asked about my schooling, my projects. Asked if I'd seen the new episode of some show I haven't liked since we last talked much to each other, so several years ago. Cautiously, I answered his questions, and the reaction wasn't negative as I expected. He actually seemed legitimately interested, and even complimented my drive and hard work. I tried to ask him some questions too, but he dodged each one cleanly, always diverting the question back to me without answering it. Semicolon. We went around the block and stopped in a small park. We sat on a bench while the rain drummed incessantly on the ground, pooling around my boots and dripping down my hood. Semicolon. Love the cold, my dad said, as if to himself. So tired of the heat. Semicolon. I don't think I was supposed to hear that, so I didn't respond. semicolon. The next day, which is to say, yesterday, I drove out to his place. Normally I'd refuse point blank if someone tried to force me out there, but I admit, I was curious. Who was this cold loving, nice new dad I'd been granted? Semicolon. Maybe it's someone wearing a dad suit. I remember thinking to myself, like some sort of idiot who wants to doom herself to being in a horror story. Semicolon. His house is way out in the mountains, just barely out of view of the big lake. It towers high above my head. 3 stories and glaring windows intimidating, even if they look a little small or not, that I'm not a child. Semicolon. I expected to find my dad working outside on what he constantly reminded me were his 8 acres of land. To my surprise, he wasn't there. His car was parked in the driveway, not in his usual spot, but in a spot closer to the door than usual. Too convenient, he'd normally call it. Semicolon. I parked my car well in view of the security cameras, as he'd warned me years ago that if I ever pulled up without doing so, he wouldn't hesitate to shoot at the intruder in his home. Dad? I called loudly, stepping out of the car. No answer, just the chirping of nearby crickets. It was warmer than the day before, although there'd been short bouts of warm rain all day. Dad? Semicolon. I glanced around nervously, suddenly feeling like I was doing something sneaky, something secretive. I spotted my dad's nice cowboy boots sitting by the front door. Since the lights were on in the house in broad daylight, he couldn't be inside, and since his nice boots weren't on, I assumed he'd taken his work boots and gone into the woods. Semicolon. Now, give me some credit in all of my stupidity. I did take a second to question whether it was actually a good idea to follow my jerk of a dad, who was already acting super weird, into the forest a long way from any civilization or help. The thought that I might be in danger did occur to me. Thing is, though, when you grow up with a dad like mine, you become extremely used to the flashing warning signals in your head, and you learn to ignore them and push them aside, because most of the time, they aren't real. Just a learned hindrance that was necessary when you lived with him, but now that you don't, it's just crippling anxiety. Semicolon. What I'm trying to say is that I grabbed my cell phone and headed into the woods. Semicolon. If you've grown up near the woods, you know how they can be when you're already nervous. On a day when you're in a good mood, the woods are gorgeous, each tree friendly, sunlight dappling through the leaves. On days when you're sad, the woods are an escape, trees silent sentinels watching and standing guard over your sorrow, free of judgment. But when you're scared and you enter the woods, you enter a world of shifting shadows and just out of sight little sounds that you can't identify. Cracking twigs and that one bug call you swear isn't in season right now, or was it something else? That sort of thing. And every sound seems to come from right behind you, because in the woods, that's the way sound works. Semicolon. The woods presented as none of these things on this day. I wasn't comforted by any means, but there were no noises to scare me, because there was no noise at all. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end, taut with static as I crept forward, unconsciously trying to remain as quiet as possible. Each crackle of dry pine needles beneath my feet felt like a homing beacon, welcoming any nearby predators to attack me. I felt as if the whole forest was holding its breath, and here I was, a measly fly in its mouth, buzzing around noisily. Semicolon. To make matters worse, it was starting to get dark. I turned my phone to the flashlight setting and proceeded cautiously down the old truck path. It was the easiest place to walk, considering there were some formidable slopes in this forest. Lots of fallen branches and such too, now that my brother and I weren't out here to help my dad maintain it anymore. I felt a brief flash of guilt that was instantly squashed by terror as I noticed a figure up ahead. Semicolon. I knew the instant my flashlight beam hit it that illuminating it had been a mistake. I'd thought initially that it might be a human. It was certainly a humanoid, but it became clear that that wasn't the case. It was the right height, at least, but everything else was wrong. Its bare skin bore a sickly grey pallor, each bone jutting sharply from its frame. Its shoulders were hunched and narrow, and although its back looked to be arched like a human's, there was no visible spine, nothing but smooth pale flesh stretched taut over the curved surface. Its knees, I noticed, feeling a bit sick to my stomach, were inverted, bending the wrong way, as were its elbows, although this didn't seem to hinder it from standing on 2 feet. And speaking of feet, its were largely humanoid, except the toes were elongated, and had 4 visible joints, and were tipped by long jagged white nails that dug firmly into the dirt. Semicolon. I held my breath, not daring to move, not daring to blink for fear that the thing would notice me. We stood there, the creature and I, for a long moment, during which I couldn't see the narrow chest moving with any breaths. Semicolon. Then, slowly, it turned to face me. I know that at this point there were tears of utter terror in my eyes, because I had to blink them away, to see the creature's face. I sincerely wish I hadn't. Semicolon. The front of its body was pale and smooth too. Its eyes were black as the night and the size of a golf ball each. It had no visible mouth, and its chin jutted out, unnaturally long and narrow. Semicolon. Then it opened its hidden mouth, revealing a gaping black hole that glinted with reflected light from what must have been hundreds of tiny silver fangs, arranged in several rows in a complete circle around it, and it said, semicolon, "Sweetie?" Semicolon. I screamed, and I ran. I've never run so fast in my life. The blood was pounding in my ears with each heartbeat, thunderous and deafening, but not loud enough to drown out the cracking of branches that told me the thing was following me. I'm not religious at all, but I won't deny I sent up a prayer or two. Semicolon. Apparently, that was a stupid idea. Maybe the thing grabbed my ankle, or maybe I just tripped over an exposed tree root. All I know is that I fell, crashing hard against the frozen soil of the forest floor, and knocking the breath from my body. Semicolon. When I opened my eyes, stunned, the creature was there, on top of me. Except it wasn't the creature. I'd thought for sure it was, but I blinked, and then it was my dad, smiling serenely and extending a hand for me to take. My flashlight illuminated his cheekbones, but shied away from his eyes as I quivered in fear. Semicolon. What are you? I sputtered. I know, probably best to pretend to go along with the thing, and get out of there, but, I'm the curious type, especially when I'm scared. What do you want? Semicolon. Why, sweetie, the thing that certainly wasn't my dad responded, and I swear I saw a glint in his teeth, a silvery sheen I'd never noticed before in the light. I'm your dad. I just want your love. Semicolon. When it said the last word, it reverberated in the air, and somehow, I knew it was telling the truth. Not that it was my dad, it obviously wasn't, and he was probably dead or worse. Hell if I know. But I think it honestly did want my love. Whether to feed on or suck out of me, or what, I don't know. Either way. Semicolon. You picked the wrong person then, buddy. I managed to choke out, a manic laugh escaping me as I felt lightheaded from fright. Not gonna get a lot of that out of this one. Semicolon. The dad creature evaluated me for a moment, the grin never fading. He finally withdrew the hand I'd never taken and straightened up, and I followed the movement with the flashlight, catching his eyes. Semicolon. They glinted pure black. Semicolon. In my gut I knew that this was my last and only chance. I stumbled to my feet and sprinted the rest of the way to the tree line. As soon as I made it out of the forest I felt safer, but there was no way in hell I was stopping before I got to my car. I made it in and slammed the door behind me, locking it instantly. My breaths fogged up the window as I panted heavily, heart racing so fast I was afraid I might start having some cardiac problems if my monster issue continued. Semicolon. I turned the car on, and my headlights switched on obediently. I jumped and swore. In front of my car was the thing that wasn't my dad, smiling, eyes shining black as night as it waved. Semicolon. See you soon, sweetie, it promised in my dad's voice as I tore down the gravel driveway and began the long but significantly shorter, at the speed I was going, journey home. Semicolon. I haven't seen him yet today. I'm not convinced he'll really make good on his promise. I wasn't lying. My dad's not a great person to imitate, if love's what you're after. He sucked us'll drive it long ago. But I keep my door locked, just in case. I'm not really a weapons person, but I don't figure a weapon would do much good against that thing, if it comes here anyway. Semicolon. I hope it will leave me alone. There are different types of monsters, Link, in this world. Some human and some not. But I gotta say, the kind with gaping holes for mouths and shark-like teeth have gotta be among my least favorite. I'm a medium, and I receive phone calls from the dead. I'm a medium, but not in your typical sense of the word. I don't have visions. No crystal ball is used in my readings. Spirits communicate with me in a rather unconventional way, through my phone. I discovered this gift long ago. At 5 years old, I was answering our landline and talking to voices no one else could hear. My parents figured it was just childhood imagination, at least until one day, I told them I had talked to grandma. I don't remember all the details, but apparently I said some things only she and mom knew, and eventually my parents accepted my gift. As I got older, they explained more to me, and I gained a deeper understanding of the special ability I was given. I learned to manage it, how to shut off my line, and to call upon specific souls. I started offering services to family and friends, and pretty soon I had developed quite the reputation. After graduating high school, I started my own business, where I offered private or group calls in which I would be providing essentially what was a reading. Overall, the experiences with customers were usually positive. Sure, there was the occasional creepy old man just looking to be alone with a young girl, or a spirit, that either didn't call, or had negative things to say, rendering the client unhappy. While I didn't love these experiences, I would give anything to go back to being able to say those were the worst encounters it had. I had regulars who would come in, people who trusted my abilities so greatly, they would pay over and over again to converse with a lost loved one. They'd know who they were talking to by the number that called. I could never dial a number, only receive calls from the dead. They would always begin with 333 to 333, and then the last 4 would be of a phone number they had in their lives. This is how my clients and I could identify who they were talking to. It was pretty convenient, and helped to affirm a newbie's belief in my skill. Occasionally, a number they would know would come through. Those would be a great grandmother who was using a borrowed number, or some other distant relative who either didn't have a phone or the client didn't know personally. I don't think the specific conversations I would have are relevant to my story, as most of them were pleasant. Parents would tell kids they loved them. Kids would tell parents they were no longer suffering from whatever ailment had led them to their end. I brought peace to so many lives, and felt blessed to be able to do so. I had been able to train to work on my ability so that I could limit the calls I received and choose if I wanted to allow someone to call, essentially like blocking a phone number or shutting off my phone. Most of the time, I would leave it off. I used it for work, and I don't know many people who want to work when off the clock. I didn't have to turn my physical phone off, only had to close my mind. This did take years of practice, but I had it down to a science at this point. The true story begins when I got a call while my ability was off. I was in bed. It was about 3 AM when I shot up like a bolt. My phone was buzzing, but when I looked to see who it was, I was struck by instant fear. The number was not normal. Instead of the usual 3s in the beginning, the number simply reads 666, 666, 6666. Instantly I thought it had to be a prank, someone calling and using this number. Despite not wanting to, I picked up. On the other end, I heard nothing but heavy breathing. "Hello," I said sleepily. The breathing continued, and after a few more seconds I hung up. Obviously, this was a prank call, and I need not worry about it further. I closed my eyes and was drifting back to sleep when my phone rang again. This time, it was from one of my regulars. This was incredibly odd. She was an older woman whose daughter would come in once a week to talk to her. She never pushed for time, never called me when I was alone. Because of this, I picked up immediately. Something had to be wrong. "Ali, you have to run. He's coming for." Her sweet, gentle voice was cut off, followed by horrible muffled screams. Then, there was silence. I hung on the line, screaming the woman's name, and was pleading for her to come back, when the line was filled by that same heavy breathing. "You bastard, you did this to her. What do you want?" /click. I shook my phone in frustration as the line went dead. I didn't know what happened to that woman, only that it had to be a fate worse than death, as she had already experienced that. I sat on the bed and sobbed, trying to summon the courage to dial her number, to see if she was alright. I don't know how long it was before my phone buzzed in my hand again. This time, it was a client I had seen only once, a few weeks ago. Hesitantly, I answered, hello? Hes making me call you. I don't want to. I'm sorry. I don't want him to find you. I'm so sorry, Ali. So sore this time. The screams were louder and lasted longer. I heard this client pleading, begging not to do it, but it was all in vain. Moments later all was quiet before the breathing began again, this time louder. I stayed on the line, trying to listen more closely, to figure out what was going on. I may have been imagining it, but I swore I heard muffled words. This continued all night, a call from a different client coming every few minutes. If I didn't answer, they would call again and again until I answered. I couldn't escape this hell, couldn't do anything about it. These people were already dead, we were in two different worlds, and I was powerless. I had to sit there and listen to their screams as they died over and over again at the hands of whoever was behind the breathing. As each call came in, I was crossing them off my client list in my books. I was hoping there would be some kind of pattern, but there was not. Finally, there was one person left that I had communicated with, my grandmother. Getting this call took longer, as if he knew I would be waiting. But sure enough, her familiar number appeared on my screen, and I nearly broke the phone trying to answer it. Honey, no time. He is tracking you. He wants you. He needs a messenger. Whatever you do, don't let him talk to you. I will not get into what I heard after that. I don't think words can describe such an inhuman sound. I screamed and cried, helpless as my grandmother was tortured at the hands of this monster. When, after hours filled with horror, the line finally fell silent, I breathed a heavy sigh of relief. At least she wasn't in pain anymore. The breathing began slowly, and this time I knew I could hear words. It was some kind of chant, and the only word I knew was my name, being repeated over and over. Ali, Ali, Ali. It took a mountain of willpower to hang up. It was as though his words were putting me in a trance. My grandmother said that he is tracking, and that unsettles me deeply. I know 6 are a devil number, and I can only assume the entity is a demonic one. I hate him for what he did to my contacts, but I think he feeds on that hatred. He wanted me to know it was him, and that he is responsible for this pain in my life. What scares me the most is that grandma told me he needs a messenger. He had me in a trance for a moment, and I think he was trying to possess me somehow. This entity isn't going to stop tracking me, I know that for sure. If this were a normal circumstance, I would be able to just block him, but he got past my defenses. His call came through when it shouldn't have, and I don't know if I'm going to be strong enough to push him away a second time. I work for an agency that does not exist. We discovered something terrible, and we can't stop it. I'm sorry, I've honestly forgotten why I decided to write this message. Maybe I just hope that you will understand what has happened before we reach the end. Maybe that's cruel of me, and I'm sorry for that too. But I need you to know that this isn't a warning. It's far too late for that. I think it was always too late for that. I need you to know that we weren't trying to control it or profit from it. We were just trying to contain it and stop it if we could. I need you to know the truth. I do not have a name. It was taken from me a long time ago. You can call me Cassandra. That's the call sign I was given for this assignment. Trust me, the irony is not lost on me. I work for a government department that does not exist, in a place that is not on any map. So that you can understand where it all started, I'll tell you that it is in the Midwestern United States, in a place that is very flat. Please do not come looking for this place. You will not find it, and you would regret it if you did. I'm an operative at what we call an emergency research and containment site. That is usually less ominous than it sounds. Most ERCSs last less than 6 months, and are little more than great big tents. This site has been here for 7 years, and is so big that I still haven't seen all of it. I arrived a few weeks after the first responders. At this point, I'm probably the closest thing remaining to an expert on the phenomenon. We call it the bloom. We don't know how it started, but we arrived at a farm in the middle of nowhere to find a field full of cows covered in it, all of them dead. There was also a frantic farmhand who had it halfway up his arm, as well as a few bewildered paramedics. The paramedics are how we found out about it. We always keep an eye on the emergency frequencies for this exact reason. Hold on, I apologize. I should probably tell you what I'm talking about. I haven't had much sleep lately. I have trouble remembering what I've said to someone and what I've just let run over and over in my mind. The bloom is some kind of infection. Not a biological one, we think. But it's hard to know. Every attempt to study it just makes the situation worse. We named it after algal bloom, since it has that same cloudy, expanding quality. The bloom, however, appears to be made of pure light, covering whatever it infects in a radiant blue-white color. It moves slowly, at least at first. It's especially slow to move from host to host, which is how we've been able to keep it contained for so long. The problem is, an object can be an infectious carrier for a long time before showing any visible signs. That's right, I said object. It can infect anything. A human, a tree, a desk, a mug. Doesn't matter. The only difference is the length of time it takes for the bloom to appear. The only thing it didn't seem to have any effect on was concrete. Our epidemiologist, Snow, was the first to figure most of this out, and when she announced that concrete was almost certainly immune, we all breathed a collective sigh of relief. After all, our first attempt to contain a truly dangerous event usually involves building a concrete box around it. Snow wasn't happy, though. She was agitated, even angry. Why, though? Why concrete? It doesn't make any sense. It infects everything else, and there's nothing chemically or physically noteworthy about concrete that would suggest its immunity. What the duck? It's like this thing is playing with us. Every time we think we have a sure answer, it's almost immediately disproved. What the duck is this? Watching it progress through living things is terrible. It seems particularly cruel. You see, it disrupts an object's ability to function. I'm not necessarily saying that it destroys it like a virus would. It just seems to stop it from doing whatever that object was supposed to be doing. Whatever function an object has, it just stops being able to do that. For an inanimate object, let's say a piece of paper, that's not so terrible. You can't write on it anymore or do origami with it. It will spread slowly across the page until the whole thing is light. Simple mechanical devices like a door are more inhibited. As soon as it reaches the hinges, that's it. The door won't move again. And what about truly complex thing like a human? That's a much more unpleasant process. It will move through the body, shutting down blood vessels, organs, you name it. Because it moves slowly, the death is slow, but excruciating. Subjects are long dead by the time they are covered in the bloom, but even after their death, watching it cover them isn't any easier. It's not even like we can give them a proper burial, or even put a sheet over them. The bloom will take us if we try. We have vast concrete graves, filled with medical equipment, furniture, and yes, human bodies, all glowing radiantly. I don't know how many test subjects we got through. I'm not going to apologize for that. Killing those people was a crime beyond redemption. An apology would be an insult. We thought we were doing the right thing, but you don't need me to tell you how ridiculous that sounds. Hargrave was the first of our operatives to be taken. He cried out as it overthrew him, begging for the comfort of human contact as we huddled behind two-way glass, well aware of what would happen if we did what he wanted. He died alone, weeping. Jesus ducking Christ, they all did. We truly thought it was worth the price to prevent total extinction. Turns out, all we were doing was torturing people and taking notes, while total extinction happened anyway, oblivious to our hopes and our crimes. And then the concrete started to bloom, and we knew we'd failed. We paid a terrible, truly awful price, but still we failed. I look down at the back of my left hand, and see the first faint glow. There's not much time left, and no point in keeping this secret. There's so few of us left now, but we've been wondering if the atmosphere, our air, is immune. It's matter, after all. The consensus is that it's not immune. It just takes a very long time for the bloom to show, like the concrete. One day, perhaps the Earth will be a new star in some other sky, shining its radiant color out into an indifferent void. Lately I've been waking up from nightmares, wondering if this thing can infect space too. Wondering if the death of the universe began here, in a small, forsaken corner of the Midwest. It has to start somewhere, I suppose. But truly, it doesn't matter. Not to us. As I said, this is not a warning. There's nothing you can do to stop this, or slow it down, or mitigate it in any meaningful way. Reach out to those you love, talk to them, touch them while you still can. Because soon, it will reach you, and you will die alone. Soon, all will be light. Hey, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.